everyone, it's Alice, and today we're gonna take a look at a bunch of upcoming book releases. So I usually make 3 of these a year, so I split the year into 3. So in this video, we're gonna talk about books coming out from January through April. And so all of these books are coming out in the next few months, and some of them may already be out because some of them come out in like early January. We have a lot of books to go through, so let's just get into it. And I'm gonna go through these fairly quickly, otherwise we would be here all day. And we're gonna start with the books coming out in January, starting with How to Lose a Goblin in 10 Days. This is a cozy fantasy book, and just the title of it makes me chuckle. It follows a halfling and a goblin who both think that they've inherited the same cottage, and they make like a deal that they're both gonna live there, and whoever drives the other person out first gets the cottage, which is just like a fun setup. And I do think that there is like an outside enemy lurking as well, so there's something with that. And it just looks and sounds so cozy and so fun. Secondly, we have Graceless Heart, which caught my eye because of the cover and also because I've read a few books by this author and I'm interested in reading more. This is historical fiction fantasy set in the 15th century, I think, in Volterra, where we meet this sculptress who enters some sort of like secret competition, and it says that this competition is held by an immortal family, and this main character has some sort of magical ability, but I think magic is like outlawed in the city that she's from, and so I think she gets in trouble because she uses this magical ability or something. And it sounds interesting. I like historical fiction set in this time period and when it's mixed with fantasy, so I think it could be good. Then we have more fantasy with A Vow in Vengeance, and this caught my eye because apparently it has some dark academia elements, which I love. And it follows this main character who has to go to this like cutthroat college where they do, I think, some sort of tarot card magic or something. And this main character is hell-bent on revenge because the people in power has killed her whole family, I think. This is also a romantasy book, so I don't know about that, but if there's a lot of like the school stuff and like other stuff going on, I think I might be interested in it, but romantasy isn't like my favorite thing, so we'll see. Next, we have a mystery. It's A Box Full of Darkness, which I'm interested in because I want to read more from this author. I've read one book by her and I really enjoyed it. This one follows two siblings, I think, who return to their childhood home, which they fled a couple of decades ago. And the reason that they go back is that the ghost of their dead or disappeared brother, I mean, if he's a ghost, I'm assuming he's dead, the ghost calls them back to this place, so there's obviously some paranormal elements in here. And I think the story is all about them returning to this house and unraveling what happened back in the day and all of these secrets. The next one is also a mystery. It's The Bookbinder's Secret, but this is historical fiction as well. It's set in 1909, and we follow the apprentice to this bookbinder in Oxford, and one day she's given, I think, a burned book for some reason, and in that book she finds a hidden letter which tells a tale of like forbidden love, and she becomes obsessed with this whole story and starts like tracking down where the story comes from and like what's going on, which turns out to be a little bit of a dangerous pursuit somehow. Back to some cozy fantasy, we have The Elsewhere Express, and this follows a main character who is referred to as a lost soul. She's sort of going through the motions of life. She's not very happy and she's not really living. And one day on her subway ride home, her thoughts wander too far and she ends up waking up on what is called the Elsewhere Express, which is like a magical place where people can find purpose and belonging. And I think that it's a place where you can reimagine your life. And I love those kinds of stories, and this just sounds perfect for me, so I definitely want to read this one. Then we have Women of a Promiscuous Nature, which is a historical fiction book. I think it's set in the 1940s in Carolina. And the story is about this woman who is unmarried and single and she lives alone. And because of this, she is on her way home one day and she's forced by someone to go to this medical clinic and undergo involuntary medical procedures just because she's single. And there's something about people wanting to preserve decency and make sure that sexual diseases don't spread around. But I don't think that this woman is actually promiscuous, and it wouldn't really matter if she was. And I think she ends up in some sort of colony with a bunch of other women, which sounds absolutely insane. Next, we have Dandelion is Dead, which is a contemporary book about this woman whose sister passes away. And I think the sister's name is Dandelion. And the sister, who is still alive, our main character, she for some reason goes into her dead sister's phone and into this dating app that she has. And in that dating app, there is this guy who seems very charming, who is written to Dandelion. And our main character decides for some reason to like go on a date with this guy and pretend to be her sister. And I think they actually end up falling in love, and obviously that gets a little bit complicated when the main character is pretending to be someone else. Then we have got The Last of Earth, which is a historical fiction book with a little bit of adventure to it, it seems, which is what intrigues me about it. It's set in Tibet in 1869, I think, and it's at a time when Tibet is closed to outsiders, but the British Empire, ever expanding, is very interested in this country. And so they start like recruiting Indians who can make it into the country to sort of do surveyor work for them. And I think we follow one of these people and this other woman who is a Westerner who has somehow made it into the country in disguise. And these two people, I don't know, band together to go on this adventure. I don't really know where they're going or what they're doing, but just the premise of that sounds perfect for me. We also have Fruit of the Flesh, which is historical fiction and apparently like a dark gothic romance. It's set in the early 1900s in New York, and we follow two people, I think an artisan and a ballerina, who enter into a marriage of convenience. But then during their marriage, somehow they start like, it says they recognize some appetites in each other, like some dark appetites, and this gets them going on some sort of journey. Bodies start disappearing, so I can guess what those dark appetites are. And it sounds just like very twisted and kind of dark, which I'm interested in. The next one is also a little bit dark, apparently, but more like darkly funny. It's the infamous Gilberts. And this spans from, I think, World War II up until the early 2000s. And we follow 5 siblings of this family. And there's something about this English manor house being bought by a luxury hotel chain and it's being turned into like a luxury hotel. And somehow these things like fit together. I don't really know how, but I do like these kinds of family stories that span decades and we get to know like different siblings and stuff, so I think it might be interesting. Another one following a family is The Seven Daughters of Dupree, which follows 7 generations of women, I think. And it starts off in 1995, where we meet this young woman who doesn't know who her father is, and she starts digging into trying to find out who he is, and she digs into her mother's past, which her mother is not super happy about. But through that work, she like gets further and further back in time and learns more about her family. And I think as she's doing that, we go back in time and see the lives of all of these different women, which sounds like a great setup. Then we have a book coming out from George Saunders. It's Vigil. And I have another one of this author's books on my shelves, Lincoln in the Bardo. And I really want to get to that book. I really need to try and read it this year. But this is his new book, and it follows a ghost, I think. Like, the main character is a ghost who works with helping people pass on to the afterlife. So she's like a form of death, I guess. And usually people are very comforted by her. But then she gets this new case with this guy who is just a little bit more difficult. And I think in his last, like, hours, we sort of go back in time and see his whole life, and I don't really know, but it sounds like a very interesting setup, and I think it's gonna be a good read. But I really should read Lincoln and the Bardo first. But yeah, just the whole setup of the story sounds amazing. Moving on to books coming out in February. The first one that we have here is one I'm super excited about. It's Agnes Aubert's Mystical Cat Shelter. And this is from the author who wrote the Emily Wilde books, which I loved. So I'm super excited to see her come out with something else. It's a cozy fantasy book set in the 1920s, and it follows this woman who runs a cat shelter, but for some reason she is forced to like move her location, and she ends up somehow like close to this terrible like magic shop where I think there's some like criminal activities, and it's run by a grumpy wizard, and it's just not great. And what else happens, I don't really know, but it sounds like a cozy story, and whatever this author writes, like, I'm happy to read and try because it just sounds lovely. Secondly, we have Nowhere Burning, and the thing that caught my eye about this one is that it's apparently great for fans of the show Yellow Jackets. So I'm intrigued. It follows this pair of siblings who run away from home, and they end up joining this group of teenagers who live out in these like mysterious ruins that used to be the house of a murderer or something. And it seems great at first, but then there are some intricacies in this group that they were not prepared for. And if it's anything like Yellow Jackets, I'm assuming things get a little crazy. We then have more historical fiction with The Astral Library, which I think has a little bit of adventure to it, which I'm always up for. It's about this place called the Astral Library where lost souls can come to escape into their favorite books, which sounds very interesting and kind of like a dream. Although, when I think about it, I wouldn't necessarily want to escape into some of my favorite books because some of them are very dark and twisted, but you know, the idea is nice. Next, we have a mystery. It's How to Get Away with Murder, and this one follows a Scotland Yard detective who is trying to track down the author of a self-help book which teaches people how to get away with murder. And the reason that she's after this author is because she's come across a case with a murder where it seems like someone has like used this book, and the author of this book claims to be the most successful serial killer of all time, and the reason that no one has heard of this person is because they're so good at getting away with murder, which sounds kind of creepy. Then we have one where I don't know if I'm pronouncing the title correctly, but Sibylline or Sibylline, which follows three young people who have always dreamed of getting into this magical Ivy League school, but then the school rejects them. And they are desperate to go there, so they decide to get like jobs on campus and basically sneak into lectures and like steal books and stuff to get their education. And I think through that, they discover that something darker is going on at this school. There is a little bit of romance to this as well, I think, but I don't know how that shows up in the story. This next one I really like the title of. It's She Made Herself a Monster, and this is a gothic historical fiction horror set in 19th century Bulgaria where a vampire slayer and an orphan band together to create some sort of monster, and I think they use this monster to escape their lives somehow. I don't really know how that works, but it sounds interesting and dark and a little brutal, and apparently the story is like inspired by stories of witchcraft and ghost stories, which sounds amazing. Next, we have A Far-Flung Life, which is a historical fiction book set in Australia in 1958, and I really like books set in Australia for some reason. Although I do have another one of this author's books on my shelves that I've had for ages and I still haven't read, so I should probably read that first. But this sounds very interesting to me. It's about this isolated community, and I think the book is all about how that community deals with the aftermath of a huge tragedy. We have another gothic historical fiction novel with A Slow and Secret Poison, which is set in the early 1900s, and it's about this gardener who falls in love with her employer, and this employer thinks that her whole family has been killed by some sort of curse. I've read that this is a very atmospheric read, and I always love a good, like, atmospheric gothic story. Then we have something a little bit lighter. It's Mrs. Sedu's Just Dessert, and this is a mystery. Obviously, it looks like a little bit on the cozier side, and it's about this caterer who is hired to work on this, like, art gallery opening or something. It's like a big art thing, and I think during the event someone steals a valuable piece of art and a waitress is murdered, and somehow these things are connected, and our main character wants to find out what happened. So she plunges into the art world and all of these interesting and kind of weird people, and it just sounds right up my alley. Another mystery is How to Kill a Crime Writer, which follows the daughter of this famous best-selling author who dies. And it seems like nothing is suspicious about the death, like it almost seems suspiciously normal, but the daughter is convinced that there is something else afoot. And then this author's manuscript that I guess was lost reappears, and this turns everything upside down. Next, we have a bunch of books coming out in March, starting with one that I'm very excited about. It's Everyone in This Bank is a Thief. This is the fourth book in this mystery series that I can't remember the name of, but I've read the other books and I've really enjoyed them. I know they're not for everyone, but I just think they're a lot of fun. And in this one, we follow the same main character, and he's taken hostage during a bank heist. And during that heist, someone is murdered, which sounds mysterious and kind of crazy and scary. Secondly, we have a short story collection called Seasons of Glass and Iron, and I have read another book by this author that I ended up not liking so much, but I feel like her writing in short story format might actually work for me, so I think I'm gonna give this a go and see what I think. I have no idea what the stories are about, but I do want to try something else from this author, so I might try this one. Then we have a new book coming out from Ava Reed. It's Anappara, I think, and I'm really interested to read more from this author because I've read a book by her that I really liked, and I think this one is about the last, like, noble family living on this island, and we're following the last heiress of that house, and she is out to avenge her family. And that's all I really know. It sounds kind of gothic and like it's going to be a very atmospheric read, and yeah, I think with the writing of this author, it might be interesting. Another author I'm always excited to see a new book from is T. Kingfisher. She's coming out with Wolfworm, which is historical fiction horror, I think. It's set in 1889, and it follows this illustrator, I think, who is out of work and she's kind of desperate, and she's offered the job of like illustrating the insect collection of this doctor, and she ends up going to North Carolina to his house, but then there's something weird about the house. And I think there's a dog companion in this one, and I don't really know anything from this author, though. I'm happy to try and read because I usually really enjoy her books. Next, we have a historical fiction book that sounds like the kind of book that I'm always looking for. It's Daughter of Egypt, and this is set in the 1920s, and I think we follow the daughter of a famed archaeologist who wants to find the tomb of this lost female ruler of Egypt. And that's all I really know. Any book that's like historical fiction and it has like an archaeological element, I'm just usually super into because I am always looking for more books like that. Sometimes I read them and I don't like them, but when it hits right, it's just so good. Then we have Whitby, which sounds to me like a literary mystery, and I kind of want to read more books like that because I like mysteries in general, but especially they have more of an impact on me if they're like on the more literary side. And this follows three women in the aftermath of the death of this guy who seems to have been a horrible guy, and he has like impacted the lives of these women very negatively. And I think it's all about the aftermath of his death, and it's kind of like a whodunit because I think maybe someone murdered him, but it's like a different spin on a whodunit, and it just sounds interesting. Also a mystery, but this seems to be a little bit more on the lighter side. We have The Secret Lives of Murderers' Wives, which is set in the 1950s or the 1960s, and we follow three wives of convicted killers, and they didn't know anything about what their husbands were doing, and so they come together in sort of unlikely friendship because they've gone through this thing. And I love a book about female friendship. Obviously, the friendship in this seems to be like, I mean, they're coming together under sort of horrible circumstances, but there is also more going on in here, I think, because they end up trying to track down a serial killer, I think. Yet another mystery we have is This Story Might Save Your Life, which follows the hosts of this podcast where they tell tales of like unlikely survival, I think. And then one of the podcast hosts goes missing and the other is trying to find them. And I think they end up in their own like true crime survival story. Moving on to a horror novel, we have Nothing Tastes as Good, which follows a severely overweight person who has tried everything to lose weight. He's been on every diet, and he ends up entering this clinical trial for this drug. And the drug actually works really well. It has some side effects though, because he loses like swaths of time and he doesn't always remember where he's been. And then he has like cravings, and the police start talking about a cannibalistic killer on the loose, and I think we all know where this is going. Next, we have a fantasy novel. It's Daughter of Crows, and I really like the title of this one. It sounds kind of brutal. It's about this academy that trains agents of retribution, and every year 100 girls is sold to this academy, and they have to be there for 10 years to train to become this kind of agent, and only 3 of them make it out. And I think we follow a main character who wasn't sold by someone else, she sold herself to this academy, which sounds very interesting. Then we have a historical fiction novel set in Paris in the 1920s. It's The Fortune Tellers of Rue de Rue. And this follows a woman and her grandmother who run this tea room. And in the day, it's just a regular tea room, but at night, they tell fortunes and they do like seances and stuff. And I think what happens is that somehow a ghost ends up haunting this tea room and things turn a little bit sinister. I really like the sound of this next one. It's The Somewhat Wicked Witch of Brigandale, which looks like it's a little bit of a cozier fantasy, and it's about this witch who lives out in the woods, and one day she finds an infant on her doorstep, and she's sort of reluctant to take this person in, but she does, and she raises him to be a very lovely boy. But then it turns out that maybe he's like a lost prince or something, and that makes things a little complicated. Then we have a translated book. It's Sisters in Yellow, and the thing that caught my eye about this is that I think it's about female friendship. It follows these 4 women in Tokyo in the 1990s who I think decide to open this bar or a lounge, something like that. And the story is all about them coming together and supporting each other, but also trying to get this business running and having it survive. And it just sounds very interesting. I love a book about women and women being friends, so anything that mentions that, I'm always willing to try. Next, we have more historical fiction with The Beheading Game, which is about Anne Boleyn, who, after she has been beheaded, she wakes up and sews her head back on and decides to seek revenge. And do we really need to know more than that? Lastly, for March, we have Carnalis, and all I know about this one is that it's a novella about cannibalism, and I really like the cover. We've finally made it to the books coming out in April, and I am losing the daylight, so I'm gonna try to go through these pretty quickly. We're gonna start with The Lighthouse at the End of the World, which follows a thief in London who falls out with his boss, and in an effort to redeem himself, he ends up in an alternate version of London where everything that's like broken has ended up, and he's in a bit of a pickle, not only because he's in this world, but because there is something ancient and dangerous brewing in this alternate version of the city. For this next one, I really like the cover art. It's The Subtle Art of Folding Space. And I don't know if I'm fully grasping what this story is about, but there seems to be like multiple universes, and the machinery that keeps the physics of all of those universes is being hijacked. And the main character that we're following has to try and fix it. I don't really know, but it sounds a little bit trippy, and I kind of like this kind of sci-fi usually, and I really like the cover, so I think I might get this one. Next, we have a book with fairies, which I'm always interested in. It's called Thistlemarsh, and this follows a woman who, I think this is historical fiction, and it's set before a war, and before the war, our main character dreamed of becoming a fairy anthropologist, but then those dreams are shattered and she needs to focus on other things because of the war. And then after the war, she, I think, inherits a house from her uncle, or like a manor, and she goes there and she has to like get help from fairies to get it back up and running. I don't really know. I got mostly interested in the fairies, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. I love fairies. So I sort of just added it to the list. But it sounds magical, but also like the fairies are kind of dark, which I like. This next one caught my eye because, again, female friendship. It's the Island Club, and this is set in the 1950s on this island where we meet three women whose lives unravel in very different ways, and somehow this brings them together in unlikely friendship, and that just sounds interesting to me. We also have a witchy book with The Book Witch, and this follows a witch who is sworn to protect books from all kinds of enemies, fictional or not. And she can like jump into books to do her work. And because she's a book witch, she has to follow all of these rules. They have a code, and a part of that code is that she should never fall in love with a fictional character. So I think we know where we're going. Then we have another sci-fi book. It's called The Radiant Dark, and this is about, I think, Earth is contacted by an alien faraway civilization, and that civilization is 11 light years away, and nothing is known about these aliens. We just know that they exist, and it starts this communication, which obviously takes a very long time. And I think the book spans over 5 decades, and it follows a family that is somehow impacted by this. I don't really know how, but it sounds a little bit existential and interesting. I think the idea of following a family, just a regular family, dealing with the fact that this has happened could be very interesting. Then we have a cozy mystery. It's Mrs. Mabel Goes Back to the Chopping Block, and this is from the author who wrote the Vera Wong books. And in this one, we're following a woman who is almost divorced. Her husband has left her for their private chef, and she wants to get him back, and so she decides to enter into this culinary school. But then things get a little bit complicated, I guess, when she makes a friend at that school, and I think that friend either disappears or is murdered, and that is obviously pretty terrible. I really like the cover for this next one as well. It's Odessa, and this is historical fiction horror set in a reimagined Russia, and it's in the middle of like a genocide basically, and we follow a family who loses their daughter, and they decide to use ancient magic to bring the daughter back. And it actually works, but it has terrible, terrible consequences. This next one also sounds really good. It's The Ending Writes Itself, and this is a mystery about 6 authors who are summoned to this island, and already I'm interested. But it's the island of this author who has recently passed away, and this author was like a best-selling, super famous author. And it turns out that the publisher is the one who's asked these authors to come and try and write the ending of that dead author's last book because they didn't finish it. And for some reason, they only have 72 hours to write the ending, and I think, or I'm guessing, that someone is murdered during this weekend, and it's just a mess. But it sounds like a very interesting mystery setup. We're nearing the end here, folks. We only have 3 more to go. This next one is called Go Gentle, and I really like the cover of this one. The story is about a woman who is determined to live a life of the mind, but then her heart gets in the way, and it's a story about like self-discovery. Second to last, we have a sort of historical fiction mystery sci-fi kind of thing with Yesteryear, which follows this woman who is like a traditional wife and mother, and she sells her pioneer lifestyle to all of her millions of followers on social media. And then one day she wakes up in 1805. And can you imagine? Like, just the whole concept of that just sounds so interesting to me, and it sounds like a timely book. At the very end, we have a gothic horror called Japanese Gothic, and this follows 2 people in 2 different times who I think are living in the same house, but in different times, obviously, and somehow they find a door between the times, and so they can like communicate with each other, which I just thought sounded like an interesting concept. I don't really know who these people are. I think one of them is a samurai, but just the concept of that sounds very interesting to me. That was a very long list of books, so if you made it this far, gold star to you. This is the problem with so many exciting new books coming out. There's so many books to talk about and it's so hard to choose, but we finally made it to the end. If you're interested in or excited about any of the books that I mentioned, I would love to hear about it. And if you know of any exciting books coming out that you're looking forward to, I would love to hear about it. That was it for today. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!